Hello everyone and welcome to this week's tutorial on ProRPA.com. Today we'll be talking about collections and a simple looping technique as well. So I'm sure you must have gone through the blog post. If you haven't, the article, please do check it out because it always helps, and it is the legible sequence to follow, right? First understand a concept and then go ahead with the practical implementation. I'm sure most of your concerns, most of your even the fundamental building stuff would be taken care of by the article itself. The demo is supposed to corroborate, strengthen all those stuff, and make you, more practical oriented and better in terms of developing the RPA bot. That's the strategy moving forward for any learning opportunity you may get in your future, right? So, okay, having said that, it's because we are right now concerned with just the process studio diagrams. So this is what we'll be working on. Okay, so we have a process here which pretty much does nothing as of yet. I'm gonna take everything out. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna first go through the data item called collections. Here it is. So as mentioned before in the article itself, collections is like a table, right? The data is stored in the forms of rows and columns. And you understand how rows and columns work. So each field corresponds to the data, and the type of that data is defined by the column, right? The column, what exactly column is. So to give an example, actually, let's not first delve into collection right away. Let me open Excel. Okay, Excel is also pretty much the same thing, right? Everything is stored in the form of rows and columns. So let's say we have like 4 different columns, right? And I'm gonna name them as food preference, weight, and marks. I'm just making this up, right? So now name would include, let's say, the name of the person, right? It could be Alex, it could be anybody, John, Smith, anything, Sandra, and their food preference, right? It could be anything. It could be vegan, kosher, it could be Indian food, it could be Chinese, right? And what's the weight of that person, right? It could be in kilograms or in pounds, right? 130 pounds, or like, and you may not want to put pounds in each and every here, like you usually, how you do it is in the header itself, you mention that in which unit you want your stuff to be in, right? So 130, 200, 145, 139, okay? And marks, like their high school marks, right? It could be 87, 57, 92, and anything 76. So this all this information is in the form of rows and columns, where these are the different columns, like the name is a column, food preference is a column, weight is a column, marks is a column, and each of the values, or each of this, we call it like the row, right? Each of these record corresponds to information of one particular person, which is Alex in this case, right? So that's how we view the data in when we have like 2-dimensional data where we want rows and columns. Okay, and in here, like each of these values, let's say Alex, which is under the name column, that corresponds to one field. Kosher is one field, 200 is one field, 139 is one field, right? So these corresponds to fields. So I mean, these are the terminologies which are pretty common in programming or in RPA. I mean, anywhere, even in usual consulting and management stuff. So each of these fields correspond to the data of a particular person, like this person Cassandra, right? She has the name as Cassandra. So I mean, you can imagine, right? Okay, good enough. So collection is also pretty much the same, right? Data will be in the form of rows and columns, and what we can have is we can name it anything. Always, as I mentioned, that always have a decent naming convention for your all the data items that you'll be using, or even for the stages that you'll be using in your process flow or object diagrams, right? So we can add new fields within the collection by clicking this add field button, right? You can add for like the fields, and also to mention in your Excel, right, all this data would belong to a certain type, right, based on the column. Food preference is going to be a text, name is going to be a text, weight is going to be a number, marks is going to be a number, right? If there would have been a date of birth, then date of birth would have been of date type. So that's that is something which we define in the type column as well. So name, which is gonna be text, and it's always good to provide a description also, although it's optional. Name of the person, right? Then I don't know, food preference, it's also text, and food preference of the person. Then we have marks, or the weight. So okay, and the marks, number, marks obtained. Let's also add probably another field called date of birth, which is of date type, and it says date when the person was born. Okay, so we have a collection all set, right, already. Now once we have defined the different columns, then we can input the data in two ways. One, we can have the manual entry like the one we did in Excel just now, right? Or what we can do is there may be some dynamic allocation of data within the collection. So by that, what I mean is, let's say somewhere the data was read from some file or something, and then it is added to the collection, then that is also a possibility. And in most of the cases, or in many cases, let's not say most, in many of the cases that would be the case, because the RP bot is going to interact with the external applications, right? So you don't want it to do exactly like for a certain set of data. You don't want to do the calculation. You may want to have more and more data coming in and being processed by the RPA bot, right? Also, there's also a possibility that you may need to dynamically allocate the field level like values as well, like what exactly would be the column header and stuff. That is also possible. Okay, so we'll of course cover that in subsequent blog posts, but in here we have an initial values tab. We can add rows like what would be the name of the person, right? Alex. Food preference, kosher. Weight 130 pounds. Maximum marks 78. You can put a date of birth as well. You have the calendar option in here. So let me show you. Right, just change the year, and month and date are already in here as I selected. So similarly, you can add other data as well, right? I'm gonna add probably one or two more. And John would be Indian with 145 pounds of weight, 83 marks, and let's put a date of birth as 1992. Okay, So we have some data also, which would be the initial data available within the collection now. And once you hit OK, you can see in this data item of collection data item, you are currently pointed to row 1 of the data, right? So what happens is you traverse through the rows, and based on that traversal, you pick the data items from that row depending on which column you want to access, and then you perform your calculations, right? So that's one way, and that would be highly useful in looping techniques, right? Which we'll be discussing, we'll be touching upon it today, and we'll be discussing more in detail in our next week's blog post. But that's how collection stores data, right? It is not always has to be one dimensional like the other data items we discussed last time. It could be in two-dimensional form as well, where we have the rows and columns in here. Okay, next we're going to talk about a very simple looping technique, right? And for this, I'm going to take a data item. I'm going to name it as counter. Counter is something which, increments its value over a period of time. That's a very famous, or not say famous, that's not a correct word. That's a very usual terminology for a data item or a variable we use in programming languages, right? So I'm gonna put it as number type, initial value of 0. It could have been anything, that's totally fine. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna add the value of counter, right? So increment the value of counter by 1. And in the number field, we're gonna have counter plus 1, and we're gonna store it in counter itself. Right. So what we did was, we also discussed this in blog post, where every time this stage will be executed, the value of counter would be 1, like numeric 1 would be added to the current value of the counter, and then that new value would exist as the current value of the counter data item, right? So once it executes, it's gonna be 1. Next time it is executed, it will become 2. It will add to the current value of the data item, and it will keep adding unless we are sort of done with the program, or if it is not executed, then it's gonna stay as is. Now we are gonna use a decision stage, and in decision we want to iterate through the increment stage at least 5 times, right? So what it's gonna do is, you can also write this down, right? I mean, you can put the square brackets and put the variable name, but I highly recommend you to use the drag and drop from this panel, where we have all the data items accessible to the current stage or to the process flow page, right? It's always a good practice, because that way the chances of getting any syntactical error becomes very less, right? So it's checking if counter value is less than 5, right? And if it is, then yes, you want to increment it again, right? Unless it is equal to 5, you would want to go to it again and again. So you can see in here, you can either put it like this, but we want to make it like this, because this is how currently the program is, right? The process flow diagram currently, this is how it looks like. Now you want to put a backflow as well, that the decision needs to go back to the increment stage. Then you would want it to look a little better, right? Instead of putting it this way, this doesn't look like a professional way of doing it. So we have another stage called anchor stage. Anchor is just used to link different stages, and provides a very good way of making it. It's just like an intermediary stage between which helps in linking other stages. So you can link it like this, and this, right? So anchor stage is not of too much use other than this one, but it becomes very crucial for decision or for multiple decision making, which multiple calculations as well, which we'll be discussing in object flows and probably in process flow at one time. So let's actually name this decision flow as well, checking counter. Okay, now and we're going to link the no stage of the decision box, the stage with the end statement. So if you get it, I'm sure it should be. You should be. What happening is that once we are starting off with the execution, the value of counter would be incremented by 1. It will check if 1 is less than 5. Yes, it is. It will go back. It will again add the value by 1. So now the current value would be 2. Then 2 is less than 5. Yes, true. That way 3 is less than 5. 4 is less than 5. Then when it comes to 5, is 5 less than 5? No. 5 is equal to 5. It's not less than 5. So it will be no, and the process would end. You'll see, and correspondingly when this iteration would be taking place and the increment would be taking place, you'll see the change in the value of the counter data item as well, right? Let me actually slow down it a little bit, just a little bit, so that you can see the actual changes through your eyes. So we're going to reset it, and let's run this program. See, the counter is 1 now, going back, again incrementing. Now it's 2, checking, yes, still okay. Now 3, still good, the condition holds valid. Now it's 4, still valid. After this increment, it's 5, which is not, so it ended. The process is completed. You can see on the title bar as well that it says completed, right? Otherwise it would be saying running or failed in case it errored out or something. So this was slow. I also want to show you the debug speed in fast mode. Let's refresh it and or reset it is the correct term, and let's speed it. And this time it's going to be way too fast. You can see it already ended. So if you want to see the actual, because it was way too fast, let's probably make it like 100 times or so, right? I'm gonna, so that you'll be able to see it more clearly. 100. So there would be 100 iterations this time. I've already saved the program, reset it, and done. That was pretty fast, right? Literally less than 2 seconds probably. Yeah, a little bit slow than the total full fast speed. And let's see if it makes better. Yeah, it's actually pretty slow. You can increase the speed in between as well, and automatically you can see, okay, this is actually a good speed, right? You can see the counter speed changing. And 4, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, boom. Okay, so that's pretty much is the use for debug speed option as well. You have seen a very good, neat example of having a looping statement. You could have more stages in here, performing some other calculations, some other operations, and checking it and going back, reverting back to an older stage using the decision box. Next time, in our next week's blog post, we'll be discussing about the loop stage, which is specific to the loops, and we'll be using collections and all that stuff as well in the loops. But I want you to know, I want you to understand how collections work, how the data structure looks like for this particular data item in here, and what exactly is the use case, the benefit of having loops, right? Rather than me, if I had to do this iteration 100 times, I wouldn't want to copy the calculation stage 100 times and then end the program. That would be so unoptimal. I mean, terrible way to work, right? Also, I want to touch on one more thing, which is these two options, the visibility and the initialization. So hide from other pages in the process. What it's gonna do is this counter variable, because this is where it is right now in the main page, right? There is a possibility we may want to use this data item in other pages, right? We may have other pages within our process flow diagram. So if you don't want it to be accessible from the other pages, this particular data item, then you keep it hidden. Otherwise, just uncheck this box and you'll be able to access it globally across the whole process, right? Okay, and also the reset to initial value whenever this page runs. So every time this page runs, which means it starts with the start stage, then would you want to make the value of counter variable as 0, which is the initial value which we have defined like the by default value, or would you want to, let's say once it is 50, once the current value is 50, you may want to do some other operations as well. Then from 60 to 100 or 51 to 100, you would want to continue with the same operation. So would you want, like, after 50, when it re-executes, and in case if it is starting from the start stage itself, then would you want it to reset it to the initial value of 0, or would you want it to start it from 50? So those are the decisions which are of course dependent on the process that you're trying to automate, but also these options enable the user to do so, right? Mostly in my experience, I've seen them playing a bigger role in these sub pages. At main page, we want our process to be as easy as possible, because you know what, let me tell you a secret. Whenever you're showing it to anybody, other than any RPA developer, if you're showing it to any client or a process owner, right, who's currently doing this process manually, which you're trying to automate, of course, then they would only most of the time see just the main page. So your main page usually directs the control of execution to sub pages, right? Let's say you have just one stage which will say login, and the login would actually redirect you to a sub page or to an object, and it will log into the application that you're trying to work on using your RPA bot, right? So once login is done, you would want to come back to the process flow, and they would see, okay, the person in this particular stage is just logging in. Okay, fine, I get it, right? So it should make perfect sense at the main page level, and at the sub page level, it usually is like division of different functionalities that the bot is trying to automate. There could be login, there could be traversal within this application, inputting of some parameters, then extracting the results. So all that stuff usually happens at the sub page level, and that's a good way to do it as well, because the more you divide your project into smaller modules, the easier it becomes to manage it, and it helps in scalability as well. Tomorrow, if you want to add new features, all you have to do is simply add one stage to direct your control to that particular sub page where you have added these stages to implement the new functionality, the new feature, right? Okay, that is pretty much it for this week. Stay posted. Hope you guys liked it. Please do let me know in your comments, and your feedback is highly appreciated. Even if it is not good, if there's something that you may want to change or make it better, optimal in any possible way. We are here for all the optimizations we possibly could, right? That pretty much is the intent for the RPA solution. So let me know. I'll be more than happy to address your concerns, anything, whether it's the certification, whether how do I proceed. This is my background, and I love interacting with people. So please feel free to reach out to me via any means. I have like the Pro RPA blog. We have the YouTube channel in here. You can reach out to info@prorpa.com as well. You can reach out to me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, anything you name it, right? So please do stay connected, and if you want to learn it thoroughly, do check out the CRISPR Learning book and the video tutorial series. The links for it is provided in the description of this video, and happy automating. Thank you very much. Have a good bye. See you. Have a good one.